Hello and welcome to another podcast and video from fantasyfootballscout.co.uk. Today we turn to the Sky, a fantasy football game where managers are currently sorting through their Overhaul team before the next set of fixtures. For this episode I'm joined by Luke. Luke, welcome, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. Thanks for having me on. Happy to talk about Sky for once on Fantasy Football Scout. It's been a while.
Yeah, so as you know, I think it was actually your influence a few years back that got me into Sky as well, and I love it every season, and it's got a different bunch of rules to FPL. You get to get captain every day that there's matches, for example, and of course you're restricted to transfers, and there's no pricing market as well, and I like that because that means you don't have to worry about players going up or down in price. But first of all, it'd be good to go through perhaps some general advice for Sky overhauling before we get into details. So the overhaul is a fixed wildcard essentially for those that are familiar with FPL. It's ahead of the fifth set of matches called gameweek 6 in Sky, and there's another overhaul early next calendar year too. But what general advice is there for those overhauling at the moment?
Yeah, I think there's a number of ways to obviously use this, but I'll talk about some ways that have been quite successful to me in the past. So they're kind of the ways I look to implement it. But in the first most obvious piece is just to use it. If you don't use your overhaul, then you lose it. So you'd have to have a pretty good team not to have at least one player that you'd want to swap around in there. So make sure you do it during the period before it ends from this game week starts. And really, generally what I look to do is kind of disregard fixtures to a large extent, at least in defence. I think you don't really want to be wasting your swaps in that area if you can help it. I think Dan Cox is a former champion. He made something like 4 transfers in his defensive back line the entire season, the year he won it.
Okay.
So I think nailing that back line is really key. So when it comes to that, you've obviously got the overhaul later in February. So I would even extend the ticker on Fantasy Football Scout all the way out until when the overhaul comes out in February. Mm-hmm. And maybe you could look at fixtures to that extent who's got a really good run. But to me, it's more about picking the right stable players who are just going to play every week, the old school classic rules of fantasy football, and try not to worry too much about them. So that's what I generally do at the back. Premium defenders have been fantastic in Sky the last couple of years. So I would look to get quite a few premiums from the Man City and Liverpool and just leave them in there. Don't worry if Liverpool, for example, have got not particularly good games. I wouldn't let that play into your mind too much. And then structuring your team is obviously very key. And I think similar to FPL here, you want kind of price points to a certain extent. You don't want to have to be making 2 or 3 subs if something fails. So if you're picking a player who you're not overly confident in, you want to make sure that there's another player around the same price that you could move to. So I think a good example here is Aston Villa's Gilbert or Brighton's Dan Burn, who are very, very cheap in the game, and that's their main appeal, to be honest with you. But at least they're literally 0.1 different. So I think it is viable to go that route and spend a lot of money elsewhere in your team because they accompany each other. So that's kind of an example. And then aside from that, it's the old classic thing that Sky that really can have a massive impact on your ranks, as those who have gone Aguero-less over the last couple of weeks have noticed. It's getting your captain right. It's getting those captain days, having a nice mix of different captain options for different days, so you don't have to utilise the transfers. And it's just nailing that captain is so key. If you've had Aguero captain the last couple of weeks, then you've absolutely flown up the rankings. It's always good to bear that in mind. And there's obviously some individual days where you might want to ignore a captain or have one in. So I think we're going to look at those in a bit.
Yeah. I've just put up on the screen one of them. The one that's coming up is Villa against West Ham on a Monday. Now, sometimes I look at these types of fixtures and go, I don't want anyone. But sometimes I look at them and think, well, there could be a player there that I want for a few game weeks, so I'll get them in as well. So we've got Villa against West Ham coming up on Monday the 16th, but of course there's another one as well, Friday the 20th of September, Southampton Bournemouth. So I'm looking at those and thinking, with my eye on, I should have some kind of coverage for them, but I don't want it just to be a coverage. I want it to be a player that I might get some points for. What's your attitude to these single game weeks? I mean, they look, on the face of it, a little boring, these ones. But yeah, what do you think of that? These kind of non-entity single game week ones?
Yeah, I think you've nailed it there. To be honest, I think it's There's always merits for just bringing a player in for an individual day, as long as he's going to do it. I mean, there's been a game in the past, I can remember Benteke, of all people, on a random game for Villa, scored something like, or it might have been Palace he played for at the time, I can't remember. Anyway, two or three goals he got, and as a captain, it was a complete differential, absolutely launched everyone out the rankings. You remember those days, but to be honest with you, quite often they do fail. And if you're making a sub to bring someone in, he gets 2 points, and then you don't really want him in your team long term. You then have to make another sub probably to get them out. So I think you've nailed it in terms of if you've got a player that you kind of want. So, for example, the Villa West Ham game, I think Sebastian Haller is just great value in the game at 8.2 million striker. And they've obviously got a tidy set of fixtures for quite a while. I see the Villa game as a captain as more of a bonus. So even if he didn't have that, I would be looking at Haller anyway. So for that reason, I sort of think for that game, I do like Haller. But my general advice wouldn't be to just bring someone in for an individual day unless you're more happy with them long term. Obviously, it can work, but it's just extremely rarely. The Southampton-Bournemouth game you've already mentioned is a prime example where I don't really want any of those players from those teams in my team long term. However, there is Harry Wilson is extremely cheap in the game. He's 7.3 million. Obviously taking free kicks and is very good at them. And he does offer an opportunity if you want someone, as I said before, about around the same price. So you've got Mason Mount, who's 7.3, who may be a better long-term pick. He's also getting shots on target bonus quite a bit. So you could start with Wilson and play him in the first week, and then the second week he plays on the Friday, and you'd have him as captain, and then later on you could transfer him out to Mount. So that's an example of where utilising your transfers to manipulate the captains could be fairly worthwhile. Generally, I would advise that on more expensive players, the players who have got an extremely high ceiling, like your Aubameyangs and people. But given the way it's set out, it's quite a nice early one to do, especially if you haven't used that too many before Overhaul. So it's something I'm looking at.
Yeah, no, it's a good point, because those like yourself who look at the pricing in detail there will have noticed that Harry Wilson is a great move and an easy move to a player like Mason Mount as well. And looking at those types of prices as well, there's a lot, say for example Maddison in the early 8 million or so, but that chimes along with say the same price as Zinchenko. So say for example Zinchenko loses his place in defence, you can move him out if your formation allows it, to a Maddison. So it's thinking along those lines, thinking in terms of I like this in the FPL as well. Don't think of the player, think of the slot and the price, really, what they're moving into, and moving players around that. And they're very precious, these transfers in that. So I think that's a good time to have a look at your team. So we've got your team, and what we're going to do is use it really as a way in to look at position by position. But first of all, I just wanted to look at the formation there. At the moment, you've got 4-3-3. I'm presuming throughout the season that will change. Every now and again you might get an extra defender, you might reduce up front a bit. But what do you tell me about that 4-3? Why 4-3-3 at the moment? What does that give a Sky player at the moment, that formation?
I think it offers probably the best flexibility in the game. You already touched on it there. So I've got Haller, who's 8.2. I can swap him to Maddison in one move if I wanted to, and go 4-4-2. He's also around the same price. You've also mentioned Zinchenko, who loses his price, so I could go to Maddison. There's a number of players around that 8.2 million mark in defence, midfield, and attack. You've even got Pukki at 7.8, for example, just incredible value. So I think it offers really, really good flexibility. The other benefit of it at the moment, it seems to be midfielders seem to be lacking this year so far. Extremely lacking, in fact. In years gone past, midfielders were absolutely dominant in Sky, and the last couple of years, the defenders have become the dominant force. We haven't had as many clean sheets this year, and there's been a few tweaks to the bonus. So strikers now get bonus more easily by their shots on target, and they've also come down in price, and we're seeing a return of the premium striker. So I think strikers have been really helped. Defenders still maintain to be extremely strong, whereas midfielders, combined with the fact that Mane and Sterling have been moved out of midfield and up front, and Salah's also a forward in Sky compared to FPL, you're basically left with De Bruyne as pretty much the only premium midfielder you'd even should be looking at, really. So it's been hampered. So I think the 4-3-3 is good because it limits the amount of midfielders that are in your team. I can also see an argument for 5-3-2 because, like I say, defenders are really good, and you've got three midfielders. But for me, those are the two go-to formations at the moment, just because they're limiting midfielders who aren't doing particularly well.
Okay, well, let's look at player position by position, player by player at the moment. So we'll start at the back, nice and easy with goalkeepers as well. Before we came on air, you mentioned a couple of names of goalkeepers, but in this particular team, you've gone for Pope here. So why should fantasy managers be considering Pope, and what other goalkeepers do you think they should be considering in Sky?
Yeah, to be honest with you, there's only two names that have popped up for me, and that's because Alisson's injured. Otherwise, he would be the third, and that's Pope and Ederson. Ederson, I'll talk about quickly. To be honest, I think Ederson is the better pick. In Sky, you get an extra 2 points for a clean sheet over a defender, so he gets 7 points per clean sheet. So if he keeps a clean sheet, he's got 2 points per appearance. That's 9 points. Now you consider that Man City are probably likely, I think most people would say, to get around 20 clean sheets again if it goes to tight. That's a hell of a lot of points. And Ederson, considering he's only around $1.5 million more than Pope, you could argue is a better value pick as a result of that. Also, Ederson, it's not like he doesn't make saves. I think he's made a tier 2 saves, or at least a tier 1 saves already during this 4-week period. So he has got that in his locker too. So honestly, I do think he is probably the better pick over Pope. However, obviously that means sacrifices elsewhere. So something I've been debating a long time is whether to go Pope and Soyuncu, or whether to go Ederson and either a Burn or Gilbert, and I'm still not decided. I just want to throw that disclaimer: this is not my set team. This is
it's a way in for us to discuss these types, and it's good that you've got a number of players in mind for these different positions. Yeah.
So to move on to Pope, I think for now, I think Burnley's fixtures are really good, and I think that Pope could potentially match Ederson based on the fact that his games are really good. He is really good on the saves, as everyone who plays FPL will know. And saves have been helped this year. They've lowered the parameters that you need to actually get that bonus. So I think if we applied the new metric to last season's data, Fabianski actually benefited out of all players, midfielders, strikers, everyone, by getting the most extra points, something like 40 extra points, because he's obviously a bit of a dab hand at the saves. Now Pope's got that in his locker as well, so I'm hopeful that Pope can get fairly close to Ederson. But ultimately, if Ederson's churning out those clean sheets left, right and centre, it is something that I may look to swap to later. And I've obviously got that out plan to swap Soyuncu to Burn or Gilbert, whoever's starting games and looking to be the better option of those two.
I think with Pope as well, historically the Burnley keeper, whoever it is, does well in saves. We've spoken before on the Scoutcast about FPL and about the way that they try and restrict players to long shots, which are easier for the Burnley keeper to save. That's their aim anyway. And I've had Pope and the likes of Heaton as well for great success in Sky before as well. So yeah, I very much back that move there. Looking at, so you mentioned about bonuses as well. So we're going to look at some other bonuses about some other types of players coming up, but just as a way in with save bonuses as well. So there's tier 1 and tier 2. Basically, obviously, you get more with tier 2, tougher to get as well. And looking at that, Lloris and Pope and Tim Krul are the ones to really rack up those tier 2 save bonuses. So that's an indication. We're only 4 weeks in, but it's an indication of where Pope's at in terms of getting those extra points, because that's what we're all after in Sky as well. We want them to play, and it's a nice surprise when on the face of it they do nothing, and then you look at your Sky score and the player's got about 9 points, and you're thinking, how did they get them? And then you realise they've racked up a few bonuses and things, and I like that. I like that with Pope. Let's look at your defence then. So Otamendi's coming in. It's like they've thrown us a bone. I spoke to Josh from Always Cheating this week on a Meet the Manager video, and he talked about FPL throwing people bones with certain things. And I think Otamendi's that at the moment as well, because unfortunately Laporte's injured. Otamendi's going to come in. He hasn't been priced like a sure starter. He's 8.8, I believe, which is relatively cheap for that. And we've got Zinchenko as well priced. And you've got Alexander-Arnold as well. I think well priced as well. 9.9, I believe he is. And you mentioned Soyuncu as well. We've got a cheap Liverpool, a cheap Leicester defender there as well. So tell us about defenders and why them, and what other names do you want to throw into the hat?
Well, I think if anyone's going to pick up a bone off the floor and chew it, I'd back Otamendi to be the one to do it, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Yeah, Otamendi, we've had it in the past seasons when he was first choice centre back. It was basically Laporte. Laporte was Otamendi 2.0, to be fair. Churns out the passing bonus like nobody's business. Great price, similar to Laporte's price last season, in fact. So to be honest with you, if Laporte's out really long term, yeah, the bone has been thrown. I think Otamendi is a great pick. Obviously, the concern would be considering he was out of favour before and he has got the odd yellow card in him. There is a slight concern there, but as I said about backups, I think their fixtures are so good. You roll with him now. Sorry, excuse me. And you probably get quite a few passing bonus thrown in. And then if he ends up getting dropped or City aren't keeping the clean sheets as a result of losing Laporte, for example, I've got Digne in mind, who's just 0.2 cheaper. And I just think, to be honest, I'd really love to have him in my squad full stop. He's just arguably Everton's best player from a fantasy perspective. And they've still got really good games. So I wouldn't hesitate to bring him in for Otamendi if there was issues moving on. In terms of Alexander-Arnold, I think he's been talked about quite a lot. I don't think I have to touch on it too much. The guy is just, I mean, he's cheaper than Robertson and Van Dijk. He's playing in a fullback position where tackles are now more easier to obtain. The bonus is in Sky. So there's more chance of him getting tackles. Plus, he's pushed up so often that he often has to run back in a desperate attempt. So tackles are in his locker.
Yeah.
And obviously his main appeal is he's just a ridiculous goal threat in all areas with set pieces and from open play. So I think Trent Scott is definitely the pick to have at the moment from Liverpool's defence, even above Van Dijk, which seems crazy to think, but yeah, that's how good he is. Zinchenko, I've gone with simply because he's ridiculously cheap. He's 8.2 million. Now I know there is a concern moving forward that he may get dropped, but we've already discussed that price, 8.2, is a very good price. I think there's lots of options I could move to if I need to. So I'll worry about that later. He's still managing to get passing bonus, and he's actually really involved in the attacking play. I think he's been unlucky not to get a couple of assists. He's assisted the assister, the last 3 goals City have scored or something, I think. So he's pretty much nailed in my team. And I've already discussed Soyuncu to a point. However, this guy's 6.2 million. It's extremely cheap. And Leicester are potentially a top 6, 7, 8 side. Maybe even higher, some people might put them. Now, I think over the course of the season, although their clean sheets haven't been great so far, I think they've only got 1.
Yeah.
You'd expect them to get somewhere between 10 and 15. And for 6.2 million, that's absolutely fantastic. Then you throw on the fact that this guy is actually the highest scoring defender in the game currently. And that's with only the 1 clean sheet, because he just seems to have so many strings to his bow. He's getting passing, he's getting tackles the next week, he's then getting man of the match, he's throwing in assists. So I suppose there's 2 ways you can look at that. You can look at that and think, this guy's amazing, like you have to get him, he's so cheap, he can get points from anywhere. And then the part of me also does think, however, that he's been a tad lucky and it's not consistent in any one area. It's not like we can look at Otamendi and just say, well, he's going to get passing bonus every week and you can rely on it. With Soyuncu, I think passing is probably his most achievable, which he could quite easily do. But it's more the price with him. And by any means, I've not said he's completely nailed in my team. He may swap out for Ederson and Burn. But for now, he also has the luxury of covering that Leicester captain day.
Yes.
So I think that is why he's a standout option to start the season at least. However, their fixtures around that are not great. But at the end of the day, he's not keeping clean sheets. Hopefully he's getting bonus.
It's like what you were talking about fixtures. It's like one of your first comments was extend that fixture ticker. Just extend it. And if you do extend the fixture ticker, so if in FPL game week 9, so that'll be game week 10 or 11 or so in Sky. So we're talking in a few game weeks time. Leicester's fixtures turn dramatically and they get fantastic. And they get fantastic for about 2 months. And so I think he's a good option in FPL and Sky, crucially in Sky as well. And I've got up on the screen as well a list of just a snapshot of those who have been getting the top tackling bonus as well. And that Soyuncu is on there as well. So he's already achieved that. You mentioned he has various strings to his bow, and he's getting that there. And for 6.2, he looks great. Eric Peters as well. Burnley have great fixtures coming up. Peters could be a player you could be getting some returns, especially a lot of people be going for Pope. But not many probably doubling up on Burnley, and they may be missing out on those extra clean sheet points there. So he's another a player to mention there. Wan-Bissaka is one I want to mention. He was in my initial Overhaul draft because he is a freak of nature when it comes to tackling. He is, I think he is the best in Europe. He's certainly one of the best at tackling. And we can see he's got 3 tier 2 tackling bonus there. That's more than anyone. I mean, he's almost like in a league of his own there. Big caveat though, Manchester United can't keep a clean sheet. So I've kind of gone off him. What do you think of Wan-Bissaka?
Well, I had him in my teams, and I had him for captain. I had him captain the one day that Man United played on a single match day, and he got 1 point in that game. Outside of that, he got tier 2 tackles in every other game, just sod's law as usual. But I think you've said it there. I still think he is a great option. He just needs to be able to add those clean sheets to his game. And at the moment, when you've got Otamendi at 8.8, and I think Wan-Bissaka is 8.6, he also offers. He offers reliable passing, which is generally more reliable on tackles, although with Wan-Bissaka he's an exception. You'd expect him to get it all the time. But it's just the fact that he gets the clean sheets as well. So if we see any hint of Man United actually being able to keep clean sheets, then Wan-Bissaka is still a great pick. He's also, Man United may often get individual match days because obviously they're liked for TV for obvious reasons. And in the main, you probably don't want to be transferring in Man United attackers and options and out because we're generally not that great. So if you've got Wan-Bissaka as a set and forget, even in a game where he doesn't keep a clean sheet, you might pick up a tidy tier 2 tackles and end up with a fairly respectable captain. So I do think he is another really good option, to be honest with you. As you can see down the list, if it's still up there, they're all fullbacks in the list for tackles, apart from Sonuku seems to be a freak of nature, and then Bowley, which is just a kind of surprise one in there. But the rest of them are all fullbacks, so that's generally the way it will go, I think.
Yeah, there's another name there, Pereira as well. Now this is talking about Leicester's fixtures becoming really good. Pereira's, you've got to shell out more money there, but I've had Pereira in Sky before, and he's one of those players that just racks up the points. He racks up assist points as well, and we've seen there that he's actually doing really well for tackling bonus as well. He's got various price points as well. It's just a name to consider. He's not in my team at the moment, but I have a slight eye on him as well because he can be a little gem, and he's quite low owned. He's quite low owned, not a fashionable player. Let's move on to midfield. Looking at your team there, as you mentioned, this is not the year of the midfielder. You say you've got De Bruyne and you've got Wilson there covering. We spoke about covering a single fixture, and you've got Pepe there as well from Arsenal. Take me through your midfield options. Where you're fairly definite on getting 3. Why that 3, and in particular Pepe as well. Looks interesting.
Yeah, so I think De Bruyne is pretty obvious at the moment. The games are fantastic. He's in fantastic form. He's it's nice to have a premium slot there in case if it doesn't work out, I can always go down quite easily to anyone if I need to. I don't think you need to overthink that one. I do think that his rate of returns will slow slightly because surprisingly he's not really getting passing bonus this guy, which generally you want to accompany that with your players in case they do blank. At least they're picking that up. But at the same time, if he's churning out the assists he is at the moment, then it's not a concern. So I don't think he's a complete nailed-on pick for Sky, surprisingly, but he's certainly a very good option in my mind. So I've gone with him. Wilson, we've already discussed. It's more just to cover those first 2 days where I'll be looking to switch to Mount afterwards, or I may even just start with Mount and forego it. I'm still undecided on that. And the reason why I like Mount or Wilson is generally I'm picking players who are taking shots at goal or potentially getting shots on target. So I think that's an easier metric to get a bonus with actually having a player who actually has an attacking threat. I mean, there's some options from Norwich, for example, Letner, I think his name is, in centre midfield, who's getting passing bonus. Okay. He's a little bit cheaper than Wilson. So potentially you could rely on that, but getting a goal or an assist for him, probably not going to happen. And then obviously relying on Norwich controlling the ball a lot, which, moving forward, I don't know whether that's going to remain. It kind of reminds me a little bit of Fulham and Seri we had in one of the year, who was churning out the bonus, keeping hold of the ball, tackles, passing, everything, and then he kind of got found out and it went to pot. And the other options, you don't really have any other sort of players around that price particularly that I'd want to move to. So I want to keep that price high if I can, or high-ish around the Wilson Mount mark.
Yeah.
So that's my thinking there. Pepe is the one that's giving me sleepless nights, to be honest with you. I think you'll have looked, Joe, as well, because obviously you play And I saw you mention on the Scoutcast, Arsenal have just got, I think it's anywhere up to around 8 games where they're either the standout captain pick for that day, or they're just the only team that are playing on that day that are worthwhile. So combined, it's anywhere debatably between 6 and 8 whether the best captain pick. So part of me here thinks you should just get Aubameyang because he is the best captain going on his past history. So I'm still undecided. However, Pepe is just such a good price. I think he's been undervalued, similar to Salah when he joined the year he joined Liverpool. He was classed as a midfielder and he was really cheap. He was around Pepe's price. And obviously he's playing in the front three position. You could argue it's the same position as Aubameyang, just on the opposite flank, if he's going to start with those three. So you're potentially getting a cheaper player who gets more points for goals, who's playing the same position. He's also seems to be on all set pieces. As soon as he's taken to the field, he seems to be taking corners, free kicks. Ceballos has kind of just bowed down and allowed him to take that. So everything seems to point to Pepe being an incredible pick for this run. And he also crucially frees up a striker slot because they're so key this year. However, he's failed to return really. So that's the issue. There hasn't really been an end product. Now, it's maybe quite unfair to him because the first 2 games, I don't think he even started. But when he's played in the next 2, I think he got shots tier 2 or tier 1 in one of them and then an assist in the next one. So as soon as he started playing, he has started to see those points. However, it's not the kind of hauls you would like. So it is a bit of a risk going in. However, everything just seems to point to it at the moment. So I don't know what you feel about it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've said as soon as the overhaul started, I had my initial ideas. Wan-Bissaka, for example, have gone off that. Aubameyang was an initial idea, and it still is sort of. Because as you say, he's the best. I got him a lot in Sky last season, and he is great because he's the Golden Boot holder. And so that he's a great option there because he's getting shots, he's getting goals crucially as well, so he's getting those points for you. But as you said, this season it's a bit different. Sterling is a forward, Salah's a forward. There's too many forwards. There's only 3 spaces, and already if you're going down the route of getting, say, Ala, you're down to basically 2 for 2 premium. So Kane's out of the picture maybe, Aubameyang, and then if you can get Pepe as an alternative to Aubameyang, that works out. And also it's quite handy with Arsenal with Pepe, I think, because with Man City, I want to get as many of their options as possible. I want everyone. I want Sterling, De Bruyne, Aguero, you name it. But with Arsenal, I don't want to go that heavy on Arsenal. I just want one, really. And Aubameyang is the top one. And the way the team is structured at the moment, I think there's alternatives. Thabeo could be an alternative there, and Pepe is an alternative. One of the things you look at is passing as well for midfielders. There's also, with the midfielders, you said you want all sorts of things going on as well. But isn't it looking at those who've made the most passes? So these, they're not necessarily getting the bonus at the moment, but they have the potential there. Winks at Spurs is surprising. One of these Sky surprise names that crops up. Could Winks be a must own? I doubt it. Paul Pogba, I'm not surprised to see him there. I would love Manchester United to be good this season because they're full of assets like Wan-Bissaka and Pogba. Leitner as well, you've already mentioned there. And then we're getting down to the kind of Rodri, Jorginho for Chelsea as well. You're getting down to those kinds of players that have a bit of everything as well. So what other names, aside from the names in your team, those 3, what other midfielders are you considering apart from Mount? Are you thinking any of the names I've mentioned so far, perhaps?
Well, yeah, Leitner I think is potentially a good pick, and it's obviously what he allows elsewhere more than anything else. So I haven't completely ruled him out as an option to pick. I'm not a fan of Winks, sadly. I just think that I think he's a good little player, and yeah, he's getting the passes. However, with Spurs, you just know, and he's got a pretty bad injury record. You just don't know whether he's going to play. So I wouldn't potentially risk that one. Rodri is actually a really interesting one because everything, and this guy's only 8.5 million. I think he was priced because they didn't really know whether he'd start ahead of Fernandinho. I know Fernandinho's had some other issues, so it's not 100% set, but it does look like he's getting the nod. But what I would expect to see is Rodri right at the top of that list, which I'm not seeing. So he's I thought 8.5 million, this guy's going to be getting tier 2 passes every single game. He's probably going to be getting tackles as well, and he'll end up being an incredibly good value pick. However, it's not quite worked out that way. Passes seem to be down in general from Man City and Liverpool compared to last year, at least initially. So he's one I'll keep an eye on, and if that starts to happen, I think he still could be really good value, but it's not one I'm putting in my team at the moment. Ceballos is the other thing. You've already mentioned him. I think if you're going to make that that change and sort of settle to not having Aubameyang, and I've gone down to Pepe, you could argue you could go even further.
Yeah.
If you're willing to do it, you could go even further and then free up some more money. Then that way you could change Haller to another premium striker and just rotate 3 potentially. So that's also another option. Outside of that, there isn't too many other midfielders looked at. I like Maddison just as a general player. He also covers one of the captain days, takes shots on target. It's just got that star quality where he can get man of the match as well on set pieces. So he's another one I've had in and out of my teams. It's more just to do with him. The fixtures aren't that great, so he'll probably be a move later on down the line. But outside of that, I've not really looked at too many other midfield options, to be honest with you.
No, I mean, I mentioned Harry Winks just as a bit of an eyebrow raiser because Sky can often have these types of eyebrow. Like I remember, do you remember back when Harry Arter for Bournemouth was an option, was a must-have?
Yeah,
and that's
incredible.
That's what happens sometimes with Sky with those bonus that you're getting. Suddenly, a player like Harry Arter suddenly winks at Spurs, possibly. But these are the kinds of players you should be just keeping an eye on, just monitoring what they're getting for these passing bonuses and those types of attributes as well. Let's move on to forwards as well. So we'll go back to your team, have a look at that. And you have gone for Salah, Sterling, and he mentioned Haller as well. So that's set up there. Let's start with those premiums really. Why Salah? Why Sterling? Why not Kane? Why not Aguero? Why not Mane? Why those two?
To be honest with you, I've just rolled this back to basics. I think there's a lot of things that are pointing towards Aguero being a great pick at the moment. And obviously Kane has got some fantastic games coming up, especially at home. But before the season started, I did mark down Salah and Sterling as, like many other people will have, as being the top point scorers in the game. And I don't think my opinion of that has changed. So I'm just keeping it back to basics. I think those two are great picks. They also take quite a few shots. So that's good because generally you score one goal. Obviously, that counts as a shot on target. You just need one more shot in the game on target to achieve that bonus points and then get a great captain haul just off of the back of one goal. Now, Salah I think he's hit it twice or maybe once even. I can't remember now. It's not as many as you'd expect anyway, twice or once. But Salah is always taking shots. So I expect that will continue to be consistently do well in that area. Sterling generally takes less shots, but he's the most nailed on option. Like right now, if you'd say Sterling or Aguero, I think Aguero is probably the better pick. But then you're kind of booking in a transfer in my mind. Maybe not. That's an opinion thing, I think, because for me, I still just worry about those 70-minute games and Jesus' influence around the Champions League. But I certainly wouldn't say don't go with Aguero. But I think one of those two, or even going for a double up because of the fact that Salah's games are not great after Newcastle, it is an option and something I've looked at. I think this is where you want to be using your transfers. So to be honest with you, the two premium slots there, Salah and Sterling are kind of almost the placeholders. I know that I can afford the two that I want within my budget, and then outside of that, I can bring in Aubameyang for one of them, depending on how the fixtures fall. Or Kane or whoever you name it, and make that swap and have that person as my captain for that day, and then later swap them back round. So they're the least set positions in my team, despite them being being the consistent options. It almost makes sense if you.
It does make sense because what it is going back to not thinking of them as a player, thinking of their price and their slot. And they're the most established price and slot in your team. You've got those two premiums there. And it doesn't matter who it is, Aguero, Sterling, Kane. You can revolve them around the fixtures and form there as the season progresses. But I do agree with you. They're first names in my pre-overhaul team, first names in my post-overhaul team, my current team as well. With Aguero, I don't think it's a case of Aguero or Sterling, as it has been in FPL. I think it's a case of Aguero and Sterling in Sky. you shouldn't make a decision between the two really. Just go for both if you like both, or if you just like one, just go for one. Ala's interesting there, and you mentioned Sterling. So what I've got up on the screen is the shots passing, is the shots bonus that's going there. So these are shots tier 2 bonus, and Sterling is up there as well, as you mentioned. My only caveat with Sterling, and it's a really slender one, is that it's very annoying when he picks up a fantasy assist in Fantasy Premier League and he doesn't get it in Sky. These are the, earning a penalty, getting a shot, and then it rebounding, and then Aguero nipping in, that type of thing. He's really good at getting those assists in FPL, and Sky's not picking them up. And it's a small caveat when he's scoring a hat-trick around that as well, so you don't kind of mind, but it's slightly annoying. Ala is interesting there. He is getting those shots underway, so he's a wise choice there. Pookie, we mentioned, is another, and Vardy as well. So I keep talking about this Leicester fixture swing coming up, but it's quite nice in Sky because it's not like patchy. It's just a nice set and forget block. It's like, for these couple of months I'm just going to go Leicester mad. And Jamie Vardy has been, a consistent scorer. So it's just another player to keep an eye on. But I agree with your setup at the moment. I'm not considering Vardy at the moment, but I've got me a little eye on him as well. Aside from the strikers that you've got at the moment, what other strikers are you considering, or do you have that in mind about, in next month I'm going to get this striker and that type of thing?
Yeah, so that's something I'm yet to sit down and fully look at, but I'm going to be looking for those 2-for-1 opportunities now, where you can, a player plays early in the game week. So let's, for example, Liverpool play Saturday, Arsenal play Sunday, and then Arsenal again play Saturday the next week, and then Liverpool play on the Sunday. So you can make 1 or 2 swaps and gain 2 players and potentially a captain in that as well. So it will be 2 and a captain. So it could be quite worthwhile. And when you're spending that on premium players who've got these really high ceilings, you can occasionally just hit absolutely massive. So I think that's where I'll be looking to do that. Unfortunately, Arsenal generally play late on in the game week because of Europe. I think there's only one occasion, I think, from when I looked previously, where they actually play early in the game week. So I'll certainly be doing that move at that point, either a Salah or a Sterling out and Aubameyang in for those 2 games. But you just have to look through all the different. It doesn't even have to be them. It can be Haller, for example. If you see Pookie's going to be playing 2, or another striker around that price, you can swap him out for 2 and then bring him back in. So that's generally what I've looked at. Kane as well has obviously been mentioned, and Vardy as well has that extra captain game day. So if I don't go Sionku and I end up going Edison and Burn, then I'm not opposed to bringing in Vardy and captain him just for that game week, because I do think he's a player who could get you 10-15 points and then captained in that one fixture. So that's generally my strategy at the moment, but it's something I need to now sit down and bring out the spreadsheets and go through all the 2-for-1 opportunities I can find. Maybe there's plenty of people who've done that already and have set up their team really nicely. In the past, I had giant spreadsheets planning out for ages, but we've only actually got fixtures up to, I think it's around November, the end of November. But it's also key to remember we are making this overall team which lasts all the way till February, and we only have the fixtures till November. So whilst I can see a very strong argument for picking, for example, loads of Man City players because they've just got the best team and they've got ridiculous fixtures, the fixtures will then get released later, and it's nice to have a good mix of players so you don't have to change all your team around just to accommodate the fixtures, because they will get released at some point, and there will be days that you won't be able to cover as a result of having 7-8 Man City players in your team. So again, I wouldn't advise not to do it because they're that good, but it's just something to bear in mind.
Yeah, I mean, that comes back to the point we were making earlier about fixtures. And when you say the fixtures, of course, the fixtures have been released, but we don't know which day they're going to be on. And that's the key thing in Sky. We don't know who's going to play on the Saturday, the Sunday, who's going to get those Friday night games, the Monday night games, the single weeks. And that's vital, as you're saying, to constructing a team where you can hop in and out of these players based on form and fixtures, and especially those premiums for the captaincy. You mentioned spreadsheets. It's probably time we both left to have a look at these spreadsheets that we've got. But I hope we've given people enough to get going with their overall team, and remember to get it finalised this week and sort out some of those issues that we're talking about: single game weeks, captaincies, those types of things as well. But for now, Luke, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you. I think you need to throw your dog a bone in the background there, Joe.
Do indeed. Cheers then. Bye.
See ya. Bye.